Dr. Baliga here. This is my second podcast on the first modern pandemic. This is a verbatim reading of Mr. Bill Gates' blog post on the COVID pandemic. What do we need to learn? Asked Mr. Bill Gates. Our knowledge of the disease will help us with tools and policies. There are a number of key things we still don't understand. A number of studies are being done to answer these questions. The global collaboration on these issues is impressive, and he hopes that we should know a lot more by the summer. Is the disease seasonal or weather dependent? He asks. Almost all respiratory viruses, a group that includes COVID, are seasonal. This would mean there are fewer infections in the summer, which might lull us into complacency when the fall comes. This is a matter of degree because we see coronavirus spreading in Australia and other places in the southern hemisphere where the seasons are opposite of ours. We already know the virus is not as seasonal as influenza is. The next questions he asks: how many people who never get symptoms have enough of the virus to infect others? What about people who are recovered and have some residual virus? How infectious are they? He answers by saying computer models show if there are a lot of people who are asymptomatic but infectious, it is much harder to open up without a resurgence in cases. There's a lot of disagreement about how much infection comes from these sources, but we do know that many people with the virus don't report symptoms, and some portion of those might end up transmitting it. The next question he asks: why do young people have a lower risk of becoming seriously ill when they get infected? He answers, understanding the dynamics here will help us weigh the risks of opening schools. It is a complicated subject because even if young people don't get sick as often, they may still spread the disease to others. The next question he asks: what symptoms indicate you should get tested? Some countries are taking temperature of lots of people as initial screening tool. If doing this helps us find more potential cases, we could use it at airports or large gatherings. We need to target the tests we have at the people at greatest risk since we don't have enough tests for everyone. Next question: which activities cause the most risk of infection? People ask him questions about avoiding prepared food or doorknobs or public toilets so they can minimize their risk. He says he wishes he knew what to tell them. Judgments have to be made about different kinds of gatherings like classes or church going, on whether some kind of spacing should be required. In places without good sanitation, they may be spread from fecal contamination since people who are infected shed the virus in the feces. Who's most susceptible to disease? It's well known that older people are at greater risk of both severe illness and death. Understanding how race, gender, and comorbidities affect this is a work in progress. In the next few paragraphs, he discusses the Gates Foundation's role. In normal times, the Gates Foundation puts more than half its resources into reducing mortality from infectious diseases. These diseases are the reason why a child in a poor country is 20 times more likely to die before the age of 5 than one in a rich country. His foundation invests in inventing new therapies and vaccines for these diseases and making sure they get delivered to everyone who needs them. These infectious diseases include HIV, malaria, TB, polio, and pneumonia. Whenever there's an epidemic like Ebola, SARS, or Zika, His foundation works with governments and the private sector to help model the risks and to help galvanize resources to create new tools to stop the epidemic. It was because of these experiences he spoke about the world not being ready for a respiratory epidemic in his 2015 TED Talk. Although not enough was done, a few steps were taken to prepare, including the creation of the Coalition of Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, which he discusses in the vaccine section of this document. Now that the epidemic has hit, he and his foundation are applying expertise to finding the best ideas in each area and making sure they move ahead at full speed. There are multiple efforts going on. More than 100 groups are doing work on therapies and another 100 on vaccines. They're funding a subset of these, but tracking all of them closely. It is key to look at each project to see not only its chance of working, but also the odds that it can be scaled up to help the entire world. One urgent activity is to raise money for developing new tools. He thinks of this as billions needed to be spent so we can save trillions. Every additional month that it takes to get the vaccine is a month when the economy cannot return to normal. However, it is not clear how countries will come together to coordinate the funding. Some could go directly to the private sector, but demand that their citizens get priority. He says there's a lot of discussion among governments, the World Health Organization, the private sector, and the Gates Foundation about how to organize these efforts. In the next podcast, I will read Innovation to Beat the Enemy. Under this heading, the next podcast will be discussing treatments and vaccines. This podcast is derived from Bill Gates' memo titled The First Modern Pandemic. It's a verbatim reading from this memo or blog post, which can be found on gatesnotes.com.